Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there face to face this first show in the beginning of our year. But please God, I'm going to be here next week to continue. So welcome to a class which is on Midrash, even though we're gonna we're gonna use figures in Tanakh in order to understand how Chazal were thinking. So it's really a class on Midrash and the way that the Midrash thinks about different figures and different ideas in Tanakh. And today is going to be an introduction to the whole idea of Midrash in Chazal and in Jewish thought bichlal. We have different views and different opinions about Midrash. And I'm sharing the first sources. It's going to be in Hebrew, but I'll definitely explain as I read along. Okay. So I think that the most amazing thing about Midrash is that Chazal viewed Midrash as a very serious thing. And I'm not saying serious in terms of they thought it was true. They looked at about it seriously because they really, really believed that one cannot have a full avodat Hashem without thinking about midrash, without adding midrash into our lives. And one of the most beautiful quotes we have in the midrash in Sifrei says, "רצונך להכיר את מי שהיה ואמר העולם." Do you want to get to know God who created the world? You should learn Agadah. That from the Agadah you get to know מי שאמר והיה העולם. Now, I think this quote from the Midrash in the Sifrei is a very crucial one. It tells us that if we thought that halacha is the way to know God, that it's the only way to be a full Jewish personality, says this quote, no. When we keep halacha, it's how we live in the everyday life and how we act. But if we want to get to know God, and getting to know God in Yahadut is not just to know who God is. If I know who God is, I know who I am. If I know who God is, I know how I should be in the world. And viewing halacha as not something that um, in large looks is talking about everything in life. Halacha speaks about a certain aspect of life, but we are a full human beings not only through the halacha, but really, says this midrash and other places in Chazal, really through trying to understand how we should be in the world, having tzelem Elokim. So that's a very Chazal quote, very in-depth understanding of the part of Agadah in our studies. It's very interesting to see that Chaim Nachman Bialik, and the national poet from the beginning of the 20th century, a very central figure in creating the Jewish culture in Eretz Israel before the establishment of the state of Israel. And Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was born in a very religious home, in a very religious environment, and left the yeshiva. He actually had a time where he learned in Volozhin. And as many youngsters in that time, through the Enlightenment and secularism, left the yeshiva. He left the yeshiva, but the studies never left him. And he has a very interesting quote about the difference between halacha and agadah, and says Bialik, "Lahalacha panim zoafot." Halacha is a very fearful, serious face, and agadah has a very smiling, happy face. Halacha is very strict, very firm. It's firm like iron. It's midat hadin, but Agadah is light. Agadah is soft. Agadah is midat rachamim. Okay, and Agadah can let us, we are able to come out of our borders. Halacha is all about what I need, what I must do. It's shiabud. In other words, I have to do it. It's a must. But with Agadah, there's a constant renewal and a constant understanding and creativity. You know, this is the ruling of the mind, and this is the ruling of this of the regesh, of the feeling. And I think and by the way, Bialik really liked halacha. He liked halacha not in terms of Jewish halacha like Shulchan Aruch, but he liked halacha because he said, if we don't know how to translate our values into action, then what do we do? Okay, so I didn't add that because I want to stay with what he says, the beautiful things he said about Agadah. And what Rabbi Yalik is telling us, and it's so true. And I want to well, let me just take this out and continue to the full. Here we go. What Bialik is really telling us, and it's true, we see it in the sources. When we talk about halacha, the next generation is always obligated to the generation before him. Mishnah, the Tanaim are obligated to the words of the Torah. And when the Amoraim in the Talmud are coming to understand the words of the Mishnah, they are not allowed to contradict words of Mishnah. They found ways to say maybe there are a few ways, maybe there was a misunderstanding on the way, but in principle, they're not allowed to contradict the words of the Tanaim in the Mishnah. And then we move on. Geonim are not allowed to contradict the words of the Amoraim in the Gemara. And Rishonim are always in tune of what the Geonim and the Amoraim and the Tanaim are said, and very, very difficult to bring a chidush in terms of halacha, and of course when we come to our times. But in Midrash, it's totally the opposite, and it's not like that. In Midrash, if I have a thought, okay, let's put myself aside. If a Tana has a different thought, then he's Rav, than what he learned from his Chacham, you know, when he's allowed to say, I have a different thought. So no one is obligated to the last generation. And people sometimes in the same generation can contradict each other in the way that they understand the meaning and the reasons and the way that people act and what is important, etc., and understanding stories and figures in Tanakh. And one can also contradict his own Rab. So what we find is a wealth, a platitude of ideas. And it makes so much sense because Midrash is not about what I need to do halachically, it's about thoughts, it's about it's about the way I understand the world, it's about philosophy and theology, and what are the parameters in a community. And without the Torah, God is giving us a lot of freedom. I mean, we do have freedom in Bchira Chofshit, but in terms of understanding the world. And what I want to emphasize in this introduction class, which is really crucial, because we'll get to some midrashim and you will say, how come they say such a thing? It's either going to be a very radical idea, or it's going to be a very, I'm trying to look for nice words, a weird idea, like how did it understand? It's not what it says in the text. So we need to understand that when we come to midrash, it's an open space, and we can think everything, and there's no boundaries, and there's nothing that is telling me what you're saying is wrong, unless someone else is coming and say, I do think you're wrong because I think of something else, and it's okay, because it has no it has no ramifications on how I keep halacha. It's only about how I grasp the world and how I understand God and how I understand relationship between people. So that's why I like Midrash so much, because it's so open and it's so rich, and each one of us can think differently. And I also want to add that it makes sense theologically, because if we were to think the same thing, completely the same thing, then what is the usage of so many people in the world? The fact that there are so many people in the world with so many opinions, and in the Jewish world, as we focus in it, it's just wonderful because it shows that each and every one of us is unique. And the uniqueness of people is reflected in the Midrash in a very, excuse me, in a very beautiful way. So let me share the source again. And let's see more. The Gemara in the Bavli in Chagiga is saying, they're quoting a pasuk from Yeshayahu, Kol mish'an mayim v'kol mish'an lechem. Okay? You lean on water and you lean on bread. What does that mean? And the Gemara is saying, Kol mish'an lechem elu ba'alei Talmud, וכל משען מים אלו בעלי אגדה שמושכים ליבו של אדם כמים באגדה. Very interesting. Yeshayahu says there are two kinds of supporting things in life. In the life of human beings, we need water. Of course, we can't live without water, but we also need bread. We need to eat. But what the Midrash is saying in the Gemara in Chagiga is, you know what? Bread is the Amoraim, is the people who learn Talmud, is the people who's telling us the bottom line of halacha. We can live without bread from time to time. But Ba'alei Agada, their support in our life is like water, and we cannot live without water. In other words, the Midrash is saying we cannot live without Midrash. They're giving us a reason, shemoshchin libo shel adam kamayim, like people are thirsty for Midrash, because either because of what we saw that Bialik was saying, but you know, Midrash halacha is very strict. But it's also, okay, I understand. This is what I need from time to time to remember what to do if I forgot. And it sustains me in terms of being in the world and to know what to do. But if from time to time, not just bread, but I need water in order to sustain my spiritual being. And I want to add, not just because sometimes spiritual sounds like, you know, like a new agey thing. Our neshama needs the water. Our neshama needs the Agadah. Our neshama needs the Midrash that's freeing our minds. Because the halacha is very strict and it's a yoke. And if I think that I need to burden my mind and my neshama also with a yoke, then I'm not happy. Then I'm not happy with my avodat Hashem. So from time to time, like I need the water in order to continue to take the bread, which is the halacha, but have the permission to fly with my points of view and with my thinking and philosophy and theology and spirituality and psychology, etc., etc. Another thing which is very principle-wise in terms of how Chazal views the Agadah is in the Bavli in Sanhedrin. And the Gemara there quotes a famous pasuk from Tehillim Samech Bet, says, Achat diber Elohim shtaim zu shamati ki oz leElohim. Okay, God said one thing, but I heard two things. Okay, because God is great, or God is strong. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean God? Is it a good thing that God speak one thing and I hear two things? And says the Gemara, Mikra echad yotze lekama te'amim. One verse in Tanakh can be understood in different ways, with few understandings and few reasons. Okay, and when you have one idea, you're not gonna find it in different verses. Okay, what Chazal are telling us here is that also both in halacha, not only in midrash, we have a pasuk, and we have a perek, and we have a word in Tanakh, but we can understand it in few ways, and sometimes, you know, we all know Parshanei Mikra. We have Rashi, the classic ones, Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and Ramban. Rashi was the first one, so he cannot contradict the Ibn Ezra or Ramban, but Ramban and Ibn Ezra not agree with Rashi all the time. Ramban most of the times does not agree with Ibn Ezra, not about halacha, but about understanding the simple meaning of the text. So what the Midrash in Sanhedrin is doing is that giving it permission and legitimacy, and says, yes, that's what it means in Tehillim, Achat diber Elohim shtaim zu shamati. God is saying one thing, But us as people, we can hear different things because we are different. And this is a source of a strength to God, because God is the ultimate unity. But when we come to as people to understand, we can understand the verses differently. And this is very important, again, as as an introduction class for you to take it in, because sometimes you're going to read a pasuk that describes a certain figure, and we will think it's simple, we understand it, and it will come, a midrash will come and it will give us, and will show us exactly the opposite of what we thought. Not only the opposite of what we thought, but certainly there's nothing in the text that implies what the midrash is saying. So when Chazal are saying mikra echad yotze lekama te'amim, they're giving us the legitimacy to understand that we don't always have to have one meaning to a verse, or one meaning to what we think happened in a certain circumstances or certain scene in the Torah. And Rabbi Ishmael is saying, is quoting another pasuk, this time from Jeremiah, כפטיש יפוצץ סלע, כן? Yirmiyahu is describing the word of God as a hammer that is banging on a rock. And what happened with when iron hits the stone? There's a lot of sparks coming out of the stone. So in Rabbi Ishmael understand this to be the work of the parshan, the work of the darshan. מה פטיש זה מתחלק לכמה ניצוצות? אף מקרא אחד יוצא לכמה ניצוצות. The Torah is one, the world of God is one, that's the hammer. But when we as people, as learners, take the hammer and bang it on the words of the Torah, there's many sparks, and it's okay. The rock is trying to understand the Torah. The hammer is what God gave us in order to understand, and it's okay that one verse has different meanings. And when Rashi interprets that the pasuk in Tehillim, Achat Diber Elohim, Rashi is saying God spake one, but God doesn't speak two. In other words, we can understand few things, but when God is speaking, God has not understanding, like one word or one thing to tell us. And he wants us to break it into different meanings. We will never understand how the one word of God, or the one idea of God, can be few understandings and still be one, because this is God. We don't understand the unity of God, but it's our duty to try to understand the pasuk, and then and it's okay if you people few understand, there are few understanding to the text. And as you know, not only we don't have one set of midrash, we have few sets of midrash. We're gonna talk about it again in next class, Be'ezrat Hashem. We have few sets of midrashim that were written in different times in Jewish history. We also have the practice of Parshanut HaMikra did not end with a midrash. We have Rav Seadia, and we have Rashi, and Ibn Ezra, and Ramban, and it also didn't end in Yemei HaBeinaim. When we enter the modern world, we have so many Parshanim, and also today we have contemporary Parshanim that look at the text and are able to bring new things out of the text. And that's, I believe this is one way to understand the eternity and the divine way of the Torah, that every generation we can learn new things that are relevant and actual to our own life. But I did want to show you that these ideas were not in consensus with all Chachamim. And we find it here in source number 3 in Masechet Sofrim. Masechet Sofrim is one of the small little masachtot that were added to Masechet Nezikim, because they have few pages. So the editors were afraid that they're going to get lost, so they add them to Masechet to Seder Nezikin. But they're later in terms of their edition. And there in Masechet Sofrim we hear about Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and says Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Hada agaleta hakotva ein lo chelek laolam haba. Okay, so let's stop here and see that sentence. Now, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is one of the Amoraim of Eretz Israel that many fantastic stories happen to him. He is visiting Shamayim and angels and Olam Haba and Gan Eden. In other words, he's one of the Chachamim who are teaching Midrash. And here Rabbi Yehoshua is saying, Hada Agadata, this Agada, if you write it down, you're not part of Olam Haba. Now, if he, as someone who practiced Midrash, is saying that we need to hear it very carefully, it's not that he's saying there's nothing in Agada, but he's saying if you write it down, it's a problem. And this is another hint for us that Chachamim understand that most of what they say, and I specifically say most, because we'll get to the Rambam and you'll understand what I'm saying, why I'm saying most, but that most of the Midrashim are not coming to tell us the truth or to describe exactly what happened. And if you come to write the Agadah down, says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, then maybe people will think that that kind of Torah shebe'al peh is as important as Torah shebichtav or as important as halacha, and they will come to sort of worship the words of the Midrash. Now, continues Rabbi Yehoshua, ignore the brackets in a minute, והדורשה מתחרך והשומע אינה מקבל שכר. Not only that, says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, someone who is giving a drasha with Midrash, well, it's not a good thing. And whoever is listening to Midrash, lo mekabel sachar. In other words, you want to get sachar, a reward of Torah, it's not Midrash. When you hear Midrash, it's not like you learned Torah. Okay, so I wanted to show you because there is that one view that appears in Chazal, but what's very interesting, we have another hand script, another nusach of that words from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi that says hakotva mekabel sachar. Exactly, to just turn up the entire thing. So we don't know exactly what's the original quote from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, but I think we can hear here, or we can see, that there were there was a little bit of a battle between Chachamim in terms of the value of Midrash. It's very interesting to see that in the same perek of Masechet Sofrim that started by don't write it down and you don't get reward for learning Midrash, that's halacha bet. In halacha gimel, Tana Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, panim shel eima lemikra, panim beinoniyot lamishnah, panim sochokot לתלמוד, ופנים מסבירות להגדה. He's saying something very positive about Agadah, כן? Mikra, Tanakh, our holy scriptures is firm, like it's blocked, and we don't understand it all the time. That's why it's panim shel. Oh, excuse me. That's why it's panim shel eima. And Mishnah panim benoniot. In other words, it's neutral. It's like it's not for here, not for here. When you get to Talmud, has a panim sochakot. What does that mean, panim sochakot la Talmud? Okay, I started to understand, that neutrality of the Mishnah and the fairness of Mikra. And what about Agadah? Panim masbirot la Agadah. In other words, hapanim sochakot la Talmud is like the Talmud is telling you, come learn, come understand the halacha. It's really all about to make you have a better life. But Agadah has a welcoming face. In other words, no one is afraid of Agadah. And no one is afraid that they're not going to understand. And no one is afraid that Agadah is going to judge us or critique us. Okay, it's very welcoming. And another Mishnah in this Masechet Sofrim in Halacha Yud, it says, Divrei Chachamim ketorbanot ukemishmerot netuim, Baalei asufot nitnu miro'eh echad. I'll explain that word. In other words, the Chachamim are saying that the words of Chachamim, are the one that guards the words of Hashem. ורואה אחד אמרן וכולן מצילים אותן מידי הדלקה. In other words, everything that Chachamim said are important, and we need to guard them because everything is from God. And that's why you need to save also Midrash from fire. וספרי אגדתא, אף על פי שלא ניתנו להיכתב, and even though, remember Rabbi Yoshua was saying, don't write it down, but even though they were not supposed to be written down, when they do, if somebody did sit down and write down Midrash Rabbah, for example, you save it from fire. Why? עת לעשות להשם הפרו תורתך. Now it's so interesting because what is עת לעשות להשם הפרו תורתך? Is it referring to the reason why you save them from fire? Or is it referring to, yes, sometimes we had to write them down. Okay, and I think we can combine the two things. In other words, later in history, and Masechet Sofrim was compiled at the 6th or 7th century. It's after the compilement of the Babylonian Gemara. So they already understand that they sat down to write Mishnah and to write down the Gemara. That all these 500 years were learned by heart. Everything was learned by heart. They had lots of tricks how to remember and how to learn everything by heart. But after the 5th century, and especially at the 6th century, Chachamim understand that well, et לעשות להשם הפרו תורתך, we no longer are able to remember everything by heart because of all the tzarot and that we have around us, and most of the Jews are in exile all over the place, especially in Bavel and Mitzrayim and the Roman Empire. And it's time to write down not only halacha, not only Mishnah and Gemara, but also the Midrashim. And it's important to save them all because everything that Chachamim said are important, and they're all were giving from one source, meaning from God. When we move on in Jewish history and we get to the time of the Geonim, and the Geonim worked in Bavel. When we say our Geonim, it's mostly Geonei Bavel, because they were the authority of the Jewish people all around the world for about 300 years, from the end of the 7th century till the 10th century. And the surprise thing that we find in the words of the Geonim is that even though they knew everything that was written in the Gemara and everything that we just learned, except for what Rashi was saying, but all the beautiful midrashim that we learned, and all the different quotes that we saw in the Gemarot, even though the Geonim are very suspicious in terms of midrash, and we can say that the Geonim are the beginning of the rational trend in the thought of Jewish thinking. And for example, you have Rav Hai Gaon, one of the most important Geonim, of course, again, all of them in Bavel. And Rav Hai is saying about Chagiga, about the quotes of the Gemara of Chagiga that we saw here, that Talmud is bread, but Agadah is water. And Rav Hai is saying, הווה יודעים כי דברי האגדה לאו כשמועה הם, אלא כל אחד דורש מה שעלה על ליבו, כגון אפשר ויש לומר. Rav Hai is taking what I said as a positive thing, and he's saying it as a negative thing. He says, like, divrei agada, it's not like shmu'ah. Shmu'ah in the vocabulary of the Talmud and of the Geonim is halacha. I need to find out the shmu'ah. What did my Rav heard from his Rav or from his father of what is the exact way to keep halacha. So Rav Hai is saying, we all know that divrei agada is not like shmu'ah. Like, you don't need to make sure that you have the exact version, because everyone says whatever they want to say. תראו, זה ממש, like, כל אחד דורש מה שעלה על ליבו, כגון אפשר ויש לומר, you say this and you say that, and somebody else is saying a different thing. In other words, he's not taking it seriously, and he continues to say, לא דבר חתוך, ולפיכך אין לסמוך עליהם. We don't really know exactly what the Chacham, when he said the Midrash meant. And that's why en lismoch aleim. What does that mean, en lismoch aleim? Don't take them literally. Don't act in your life according to what you heard somebody said on a midrash, on a certain person, on a certain figure. It's not like halacha. ונשאל, and I was asked, אם יש הפרש בין אגדות שנכתבו בתלמוד, שאנו מצווים להסיר שיבושם לאגדות הכתובות חוץ לתלמוד. There's a beautiful question that was asked, that Rav Hai was asked. Is like, is there a difference between midrashim and agadot that were written in the Talmud? Because as we know, the Talmud is full of agadita. Is there a difference between that? Because those midrashim in the Talmud, it's a little bit difficult and irrespectful and irrespectable and unrespectable to say that they're not serious because they're in the Talmud. So what do we do with them? We are obligated lehasir shibusham. Our job as thinking first people is to take the midrash and the Agadah in the Talmud and try to figure out what was the root, what was the main idea, what was the truth, okay, what was the right verse. Lehasir shibusham. We need to remove the wrong understanding or the wrong version of that Agadah. So it's very interesting. In other words, he's not saying, is there a difference between Agadot and Halacha? He's saying, is there a difference between Agadot in Gemara, which I know I need to take seriously, and therefore, because I know so much around it, is not serious. So I need to, unpack the Midrash in Gemara because I take Gemara seriously and then understand the heart of the Midrash, and Midrashim that are not in the Gemara. Now, at that time, at the 8th and 9th and 10th century, we already had the great midrashim. We had Midrashei Rabbah and we had Midrash Tanchuma. Probably we had Tana de Eliyahu and Midrash Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. So are they to be regarded seriously as the midrashim in the Talmud? And Rav Hai Gaon answered, יש בתלמוד מעט אגדות, ומה שלא משובש, אין לסמוך עליו, ומה שמשובש יש להסיר שיבושו, כי לולא שיש בו מדרש, לא נקבע בתלמוד. Okay, so yes, you're right. יש some אגדות, there's some מדרשים in the מדרש, in the גמרא. יש בתלמוד מעט אגדות, ומה שלא משובש, אין לסמוך עליו. In other words, but if you have clear midrash, that you understand that it's a midrash, learn it, but never think that you can extract halacha from that midrash. And if something is wrong, something is unclear, something is not correct, okay, you need to work out, to see what's the correct version, because if it's a real midrash that Chazal said, they wouldn't have put it in the Talmud. In other words, if you find a version of midrash in the Talmud and it's unclear and it's words are not clear and ideas are complicated and messed up, if it's messed up, then you have to work on it and clean it and understand the idea. Because if it's in the Talmud, it means that Chachamim, the Amoraim, thought it's important. אבל מה שלא נקבע בתלמוד, אין אנו צריכים לקרוא, but everything outside of the Talmud, we don't need to learn it. אם נכון ויפה, דורשים ומלמדים אותו. If it's nice, if it's beautiful, if people, it's giving a nice idea, and everyone understands it's an idea, not a fact or not a halacha, then you teach it. But if it's so messed up in the idea, in the way that is written, אין משגיחים עליו כלל. You shouldn't take it into account. You shouldn't even regard it. You shouldn't even learn it. It's not relevant to our Jewish life. So very, very harsh point of view of Rav Hai Gaon in terms of midrashim. And I hope you can hear how different it is from what we saw in the Talmud. And what we saw was just a quotes about midrashim and not the midrashim themselves. Bezrat Hashem, we will see the Midrashim themselves and we'll understand Rav Hai of like, what do we need? What are we supposed to learn from that very strange Midrash? But we will wait with that. Rav Shri Gaon. Rav Shri Gaon is saying, Midrash ve'agada umdenaninhu. He's saying like, Midrashim ve'agadot, it's not a fact. It's not the world, it's not the word of God. It's umdena, it's what people think. And it's relative. Because someone thinks that and someone thinks that. That's why אין סומכים על ההגדה. וגם אמרו, אין למדים מן ההגדות. Like, you don't need to trust something you heard in ההגדה in terms of like, oh, that's what Yaakov did, I should do it, I should do the same. Okay? Or that's what Huldah did, or I should, no, it's not, אין סומכים עליהם. It's not something you need to take into account in your religious life. והנכון מהם, oh, okay, after all, we do have midrashim also in the Talmud, nachon, as we saw in Rav Hai, but the midrashim that you understand in the sechel and in the heart, that are true, that are touching a very deep human truth or theological truth, מה שמתחזק מן השכל, and it's not contradicting your mind, and it's not contradicting המקרא, נקבל מהם. ואין סוף ותכלל האגדות. Okay, so I'll get to that sentence in a minute. Rav Shira is saying something very interesting. He's giving us a tool according to him, and we'll see that the Rambam is going to use that same tool. And Rav Shira is saying, because Midrash ve'Agada are umdena, ולא סומכים, like everyone says, you know, what they want and approximately and have different ideas and bling. לא סומכים על האגדות. But if you come across a midrash that makes sense, rationally it makes sense, logically it makes sense, and it doesn't contradict the mikra, you can learn it. But be aware, says Rav Shrira, אין סוף ותכלל. There's so many of them. You know, we're going to drown in the world of Agadah, and for what? The most important thing is to learn halakha, to learn Talmud aliba de hilchata, to learn Talmud, you learn to understand what is the halacha and how I should live, how I should live my life. And I'm sure we all understand it's a very, very firm opinion on midrashim. The next person I want to bring his views in terms of midrash is Rabbi Yehuda Levi, who wrote Sefer HaKuzari. Rabbi Yehuda Levi lived in Spain in the 11th century. A poet, a thinker, a parshan, a philosopher. He was a Renaissance person, as many of his time in Spain at the 11th and 12th and 13th century in the Jewish world, also in the Muslim world in that time. And a Kuzari, in the book of Kuzari, when the king is asking the Jew, Chaver Kuzari, the Kuzari king is asking the Jewish friend to understand, what is this with your midrashim thing? And the Chaver is explaining as following. Hagadot, he asked him about midrash and Haggadah. He's saying, mehem shenogim mehem derech hatza'ah. Some of them is just a proposal, it's just an opinion, it's a suggestion. והקדמה לעניין שרוצים לחזקו ולאמצו, and it's just a way, like a tool in order to strengthen something that you know, maybe people are weak in a certain way, and the Chacham is coming, he's giving a midrash to strengthen people to act in a certain way, or to not to be afraid of something. כמו שאמרו, and then he's quoting him a midrash. כשירד ריבון העולמים למצרים, לחזק האמונה שיציאת מצרים הייתה בכוונה רבה מאת האלוקים יתברך, כן? God is, when Chachamim are saying God himself came down to Mitzrayim, they didn't really mean it literally, says a Kuzari, says Rabbi Yehuda Levi, but it came to strengthen the faith or the trust of the Jewish people that exiting Mitzrayim is really from God and not because, you know, of circumstances around it. So that's one explanation that he gives. Only God, it's God. ואמרו על דבר מה שהיו אומרים כביכול, so it's a כביכול, it's as if, but it's, everyone understand that it's not literally, that God came down. ואף על פי שאין זה נמצא בגמרא ולא יימצא כי אם בקצת הסידורים, אך בעת שתמצא כמוהו, אל העניין הזה הוא נוטה. And you should know, says the Jewish friend to the king. And this is Rabbi Yehuda Levi's literary way, very sophisticated way to talk to us. He wrote up the entire book. He had a list of questions that he felt that Jews ask and don't know the answer for, and then he put together the discussion. So people are asking about the Agadot and the Midrashim, and he continues to say, even though you're not going to find, there's Midrashim, you're not going to find it in the Gemara, and you're only going to find it in certain books, but when you will find a kind of a Midrash that makes no sense, we saw in the Geonim, we saw makes no sense in terms of contradicting our mind and our logic. And here Rabbi Yehuda Levi is saying that it's contradicting theology, like it's contradicting the fact that God has no, God cannot come down. God is not a person that we can see him down here. Okay, and that's what he's saying. When you get to a midrash that doesn't make sense, not only logically but also theologically, you should understand that they said it kivyachol, as if. So in order to strengthen something and to explain something which is difficult maybe for people to understand. I'm going to skip that, and I wanna end today with the Maharal. And before I get to the Maharal, again, let me just go back here. Now, before I go back to the Maharal, I do want to emphasize something fascinating. The time of Chazal in Eretz Israel, and let's talk about 500 years between 100 BCE and 400 AC. Midrash was a main work of literature of Chachamim, both in Eretz Israel and in Bavel, mostly in Eretz Israel. What we find after the Geonim, who took that whole beautiful creativity and shrank it a little bit into the Midrash, but we do find main compilements of Midrashim still coming out, like Yalkut Shimoni at the 13th century in Ashkenaz and Midrash Gadol at the 13th century in Teiman. But what we find more than that is that nobody wrote Midrashim. They just took all the Midrashim that they had in their generation and previous generation and put it in one book. The flourishing of Jewish creativity, thinking, exegetical, was Parshanut HaMikra. From the 11th century, this is what's coming up into the stage. Parshanei HaMikra, Rashi, Rambani, Ben Ezra, Sforno, Rabbi Yosef Kara, Rabbi Yosef, Ibn Kaspi, etc., and more and more and more, and Balei HaTosafot, of course, on the Talmud, etc. And Midrash was put on the side, except for those big compilement of bodies of Midrashim that were not new, but they just put them together. And we have in the Jewish world some kind of an end to Midrashim, and nobody read Midrashim. Hardly anybody wrote commentary on the Midrashim. When was that change? It started to change with Maharal, Maharal Prague, who lived in the 16th century in Prague. And the Maharal in Prague had a whole writings of trying to explain and understand Midrash. And from that time on, both also because of the Kabbalah of the Ari at the 16th century in Tzfat, Ari HaKadosh and his learning, and when we get to the 18th century with Chassidut, and the Jewish world start again to show interest in Midrash, but not as much as in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and in the 21st century. The study of Midrash, who started more than 100 years ago, is a fascinating study. And we have big Talmidei Chachamim today that invest their thinking and time in Midrash, Rabbi Professor Shin'an, and many others. It becomes something we understand is not nonsense, is not empty. It's rich, it's deep, and people learn it in university, but also in Batei Midrash. So, and I think the spark was a Maharal. And what did the Maharal say that changed maybe the view of the Midrashim? And I'm skipping, as you see, I skip Rambam because I want to touch Rambam next week. And Rambam is in between Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and a Maharal at the 12th century. So Maharal is saying, look, these midrashim are serious things. They're serious things not in terms of their truth. They're serious because if Chazal said them, it means that they want to give us a message. And if we dismiss the midrashim, we miss the idea that Chazal are trying to tell us. Therefore, what we need to do is every midrash try to open the metaphors, the codes, and try to understand, what is he telling me? What can I take from my life, from my Jewish life, from my religious life, from my spiritual life, from that midrash? So now let's see it in the words of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, of Maharal, slicha. So the Maharal in Sefer Be'er HaGolah is saying the following: ואיך יבוא בלב האדם לבוא על דבריהם ולומר שנמצא חס ושלום בדבריהם קטן וגדול. Okay, he's very polite. He's not going to say names, but he's like, I don't understand how our Jewish people, Jewish rabbis, Jewish great rabbis are saying that something that Chachamim said in the time of the Tanaim and the time of the Amoraim, that it's not important. That's little. That's not chashuv. Yeah. The big important thing is halacha, is Talmud, but midrashim are not important. Okay? In other words, they're taking the words of Chazal and is saying there's yesh gadol v'yesh katan. The big, the important, we need to learn. The katan is not important. We don't have to learn. כמו שאומרים, כאשר יראו בדבריהם דברים זרים לפי הפשט, ויחשבו בדעתם כמאמר הזה הוא סכלות. There are other people that look at the midrash and is like, that doesn't make sense. That's not what the pshat is saying. And what it caused them to think is, oh, this midrash is nonsense, is foolish, is it's a make believe, has no roots in reality. ובדבר זה הוא דיבורו ושרה על השם. And we should not say such a thing. This is, if you say such a thing about Chazal, it's as if you say such a thing about God and the Word of God. And therefore, the Maharal is suggesting, if you say it's nonsense, or forgive me, it's stupid, or it makes no sense, and only someone who's not very sophisticated could say such a thing, and then you question the wisdom of Chachamim. And if this is what they said, so why would I trust them in other things that they said in terms of halacha, for example? And those people, says the Maharal, ראוי היה להשיב להם על ליבם כי הסתום נלמד מן המפורש. Okay, they need to understand that these people need to be answered, and like, listen, come understand, okay, what they said, because what they said is really you're right that it's like a riddle, but let's try to understand from what we know they said and we accept, and use that in order to understand the unclear said they think in the midrash. כי מאחר שנראה מפורש שבדבריהם דברי חוכמה עמוקה, when we look at what they say in terms of halacha, in terms of other learning, that it's deep wisdom, okay? and we regard them are deep, wise people, then our duty is to try to understand also their other words of midrash. And why would we think that in one area they could be very clever, and in another area they misunderstood everything? And I'm gonna skip a little bit, and to his answer. And the Maharal is saying, "Aval im nimtza dvarim b'divrei," but if we find amongst their words things that are far from our reach, far from logic, we should understand that there's a hidden wisdom in them. And they're mashal v'melitza. It's an allegory, it's a parable, it's a metaphor. כן? כמו שאמר הכתוב במשלי, להבין משל ומתליצה דברי חכמים וחידותם. Our wise people speak in parables, in riddles, and if we're smart, we'll be able to understand what they're saying. Because we don't understand them, we will say, so it's pasul, I shouldn't regard this. ואין פלא גם כן אם לא יעמוד בסוד דבריהם, כמו שריחוק זמננו מזמן שלהם הוא רב מאוד. And here the Maharal is saying something in the 16th century that is also relevant to us. He's like, also, let's not forget that there's been a lot of time since they said those things. In his time, כמה זמן? 1,600, כן? לפחות 1,000 שנה. Like, maybe they say things we just don't understand the context or the reference. And obviously today as well. כך יש הבדל בין חוכמתם ובין חוכמתנו כהבדל הזמנים. והכל מודים בדבר הזה כי החוכמה לראשונים ולא לאחרים. And we need to respect the fact that they knew more than us. They knew more than us. לכן מן הדין עלינו, and that's why we shouldn't say we don't understand. We shouldn't say it's nonsense. We should say we don't understand. And maybe if we would live with them, we would understand more. And then from that, what the Maharal is going to say, and let me just stop the sharing and come back here. And the Maharal is saying, and I'm going to take, says the Maharal, midrashim, and I will try to unpack them and give you the deep message in each of that midrash. And I want to give you one small example that I like to give, which is also, I think, a famous midrash. Chachamim are saying, the midrash is saying that the donkey of Avraham Avinu, on whom he ride to the Akedah, is the aton of Bil'am, and is going to be the chamor of Mashiach. Now, a clever person, a rationalist person, read those things like why would I trust people who think that the donkey can change the sex and then stay in some hidden stage, barn, till Mashiach will come? And what the Maharal is saying is the donkey is not a donkey. Chamor, okay? Yes, nachon, Abraham rode a donkey. But what Chazal are meaning is that the word chamor referred to chomer, to material. Avraham was able to get over the materialistic aspect of his life and attach himself to spirituality and to God. Bil'am did not know how to do that. And therefore, they gave him an aton. And Mashiach is the same thing. Mashiach is going to come and show us how to get over the materialistic chomri aspect of life. So it's not that it's exactly the same animal. And the Maharal is saying, if someone takes it literally, then he really thinks either Chazal, God forbid, are stupid, or this is a stupid thing, I don't need to understand anything of it. And what the Maharal will try to do in his books is try to reveal the deep message, the deep religious, spiritual, theological, social, economical, many other messages in the Midrash. And this is what we will try in our very modest situation. We will try to do the same, try to unpack the messages that Chazal have through a very specific kind of midrashim that were written on biblical figures. So I will meet you, I will see you, please God, next week, face to face in the beautiful home of Matan. I wish you all בשורות טובות, ישועות ונחמות לכולנו. May God send רפואה שלמה לכל הפצועים בגוף ובנפש, יחזיר את העקורים לבתיהם וישיב את חטופינו הביתה לחיק משפחותיהם.